Arizona Territory. 1879. The sun was just slipping behind the red rock ridges when she stole the mule and ran. Savannah Stokes's heart pounded hard as she gripped the reins of the animal she had once fed apples to in secret. She did not look back at the campfire where her so-called fiancé, a man twice her age named Curtis Mott, had just tried to trade her to a rancher in exchange for that very mule. She had heard the deal with her own ears, crouched behind a mesquite bush while Curtis spat tobacco and said, "She don't talk much, but she's got strong hips." She had not waited to hear the rancher's answer. There was no answer that would have mattered. She was not property. The desert wind slapped her face as she rode hard under the deepening sky, pushing the mule faster than it wanted to go. Her boots were worn, her hands raw from days of travel, and her ribs still ached from where Curtis had shoved her into a wagon wheel the night before. But Savannah had no intention of going back. She would rather survive the desert alone than be sold like livestock. By the second day, the mule collapsed near a dry riverbed. She knelt beside it, whispering apologies as it wheezed. She had nothing left, no food, no water, no hope. Dust clung to her skin and her lips cracked until they bled. She pressed her back to a rock and closed her eyes. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. She opened her eyes fast, hand reaching for a rock. A lone rider came into view, broad-shouldered, tall in the saddle, his horse a bay with dust on its flanks. The man wore a gun belt low on his hips and his hat shaded sharp, steady eyes. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands empty and visible. "You all right?" he asked, voice low and even. Savannah didn't answer right away. Her eyes narrowed. "I do not belong to anyone." The man looked at her for a long moment, then down at the collapsed mule. "No, you do not." She stared, breath caught. He had not asked her what she was doing out there. He had not tried to touch her or offer some deal. He just looked at her like she was a person. "I'm Zacharias Pike," he said then. "Most call me Zach. I've got water and jerky in my saddlebags. You need either," she nodded, still not trusting her voice. He moved slow, deliberate, pulling a canteen and pouch from his saddle. He placed them on the ground between them and stepped back. She drank deep, water running down her chin. Her hands shook. He waited until she finished before speaking again. "You got a name, Savannah?" "Stokes." He gave a short nod. "You out here alone?" She hesitated, then said, "Curtis Mott tried to trade me for a mule, that mule." She motioned to the animal, now breathing shallow. "So yes, I am alone." Zach's jaw tightened. He looked at the mule, then back at her. "That man's still coming after you." "I do not know," she said, "but I would rather die out here than go back." Zach crouched near the mule and ran a hand over its neck. "I can take you to the nearest town. It's 2 days' ride." "You do not have to tell me anything more." Savannah stared at him, unsure what to make of this man who offered help without strings. She had met many men in her 21 years, none like him. "I do not want to be anyone's burden," she said. He stood and looked her in the eye. "You are not property, Savannah. You are not a burden." Something inside her cracked. She looked down fast, blinking hard. "I have not eaten in 2 days." "I noticed," he said gently, then handed her the jerky. "My horse can carry us both if we go light." She looked at the mule again. "Can we bury her?" Zach nodded. "Of course." They worked together, digging with their hands in a flat stone. The sun dropped and stars winked into the sky as they laid the mule down under a blanket of sand. Zach said nothing, just stood beside her as she whispered a goodbye. They rode through the night. Savannah pressed behind him on the saddle, too tired to hold herself upright. Once, she rested her forehead against his back. He did not comment. By dawn, they came over a ridge and saw a line of cottonwoods marking a creek. Zach slowed the horse and said, "We will stop here. Rest the animal. You can sleep." She slid from the saddle, legs shaking. He helped her sit by the water, then started a small fire. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable, it was steady, like the hush before a rain. When she woke later, he was nearby, cleaning his rifle, one eye always scanning the hills. "How long was I asleep?" she asked. "Long enough to look better," he said. "You had a fever. It broke." She touched her forehead, then looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" he shrugged. "Because someone should have." She stared at him. "You do not even know me." "I know what it looks like when someone is running for their life." She fell silent, surprised at the way his voice had tightened. "You?" she asked. He nodded once. "Long time ago." They did not speak more of it. By the time they reached Bisbee, Zach had traded a silver brooch he carried for a room at the boarding house. Savannah had protested, but he had only said, "You need a bed." When she stepped out of the bath that night, hair damp and skin scrubbed raw, he was waiting by the door with a soft cotton dress folded in his arms. "Found this at the Mercantile," he said, handing it to her. "Figured you might want something that's yours." Her throat closed. "I thank you." He touched the brim of his hat and turned away. That night she sat on the porch with him, the town quiet behind them. She sipped coffee while he leaned back in his chair, boots crossed at the ankle. "I do not know what to do next," she said finally. "You do not have to figure it all out tonight." She looked at him. "Do you live around here?" "Work the cattle drives when I can. I built a little cabin about an hour west, real small, but it is mine." She looked down. "Sounds nice." He glanced at her. "You could come see it, no pressure, just a place to think a while." She met his eyes. "I would like that." The silence between them stretched, warm now, not empty. "You have been kind to me," she said, voice low. He looked at her. "That should not be rare." She smiled, the first real one in weeks. "It is." Zach leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Savannah, I do not want anything from you. I am glad you are safe." Her chest ached then, but in a new way. Not fear, not sorrow, something else. "Me too," she whispered. And in the stillness of that Arizona night, something strong and quiet passed between them. Something that felt like the start of the rest of their lives. Savannah stood at the edge of the corral, watching the horse circle slow and even beneath Zach's hand. Dust lifted in low spirals, caught in the sun that hung hard above the hills. The morning had already grown warm, and the air smelled of sage and sweat and old wood. She shifted her weight in the borrowed boots Zach had left by the door that dawn, worn but solid, a size too big. "You ever ridden bareback?" he asked without looking over. She shook her head, then realized he couldn't see her. "Only once." Didn't end kindly. Zach gave a short sound, not quite a laugh. "This one's steady. You could try again if you want." She hesitated, arms crossed tight around her middle. "I don't think I want to fall twice." He turned then, wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Falling's part of learning, but I won't press you." The house behind her was small, squared from adobe and timber, its roof pitched low against the wind. The single window glinted with sky. She had woken that morning in the narrow bed with a patched quilt over her and the smell of coffee coming through the door. Zach had been outside already, splitting kindling with a calmness that didn't ask for attention. "You raise cattle out here?" she asked, stepping closer to the fence. "Used to, not much now. Lost 3 head to a fever last spring. What's left I keep mostly for my own needs." "You live quiet." "I do." She looked toward the ridgeline where the land rolled away in sun-faded gold. "I don't know what I expected. But it wasn't this." He leaned against the rail, arms folded. "You're free to leave whenever you like, Savannah. You don't owe me your time." "I know." She picked at a splinter in the post. "That's the strange part. No one's ever said that to me and meant it." Zach didn't speak to fill the silence. He only waited, same as he always did. She liked that about him. It made her feel less like she had to earn her place. Later, while she boiled water in the iron kettle and stirred cornmeal in a dented tin bowl. He returned from the creek trail with a bundle of greens tied in his shirt. She met him by the stoop, took the bundle from his hands without asking, and washed the leaves in a basin while he peeled potatoes by the door. "I used to cook for my brothers," she said without looking up. "Mama passed when I was young. I was the one who kept the food warm." He dropped the peels in a bucket. "How many brothers?" "3, all younger. I haven't seen them in years." Zach nodded once. He didn't ask where they'd gone. She watched the fire catch under the skillet. "Curtis wasn't the first man to try and decide for me. He was just the last one I let." "I figured as much," he said. She tasted the stew, then handed him the spoon. "Tell me something about you I wouldn't guess." He took the spoon carefully, gave it a slow taste before answering. "I was raised by my grandfather. He was deaf. Taught me how to pay attention more than most folks do." She smiled a little. "That explains your listening." He passed the spoon back. "He also taught me to mend boots and read tracks. I'm better at one than the other." That evening, as the light turned long and orange across the stones, they sat on the bench beside the door, a quilt laid over their knees. A single lantern burned between them, quiet and low. The food was gone, and her belly was warm for the first time in days. "I've been thinking about what I might do," she said. "I can sew. I could take in mending in town, maybe save for a room." Zach rested his hand against the mug in his lap. "You'd be welcome here as long as you like. But I'd help you set up in Bisbee if that's what you want." "I don't know what I want yet. That's the truth of it," he nodded. "That's all right." She angled toward him, the lantern casting soft gold across his cheek. "You don't ask much of people, do you?" "I ask what they need. Not what I want from them." "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because I've been on the other side of it, and I remember how that felt." The air stretched between them. She could hear the crickets starting up in the brush, the steady creak of the windmill turning slow in the dark. "You built this place with your own hands," she said. He looked out toward the pasture. "Every board." "I can tell." When he looked at her again, there was something different in his eyes, not heat, not hunger, but something stiller, a kind of waiting. Not for her to decide something, but for her to feel safe deciding. She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. "I'd like to stay a little longer, if that's all right." His hand turned, palm up, and her fingers settled there like they'd known the way all along. "It's all right," he said. The night held them quiet, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to run. Savannah rose before sunrise, the sky just beginning to pale behind the hills. The cabin walls breathed quiet, filled only with the soft creak of wood cooling and the distant rasp of a night bird. She pulled her shawl tight and stepped outside barefoot, the earth cool beneath her soles. She hadn't meant to wake Zach, but the door's hinge gave a soft groan. He sat up from where he'd been sleeping near the hearth, one hand already moving toward the rifle propped beside him before he recognized her shape in the dawn light. "You all right?" His voice was low, still rough with sleep. She nodded. "Just wanted to breathe before the sun came up." He stood and crossed the room without a word, stepping outside after her, boots crunching faint against the packed dirt. She didn't move when he came to stand beside her, both of them watching the light draw thin lines across the ridges. "I never saw land like this," she said after a while. "Oklahoma was flatter. Greener too, though not always in the right ways." Zach rubbed the back of his neck. "You from around Fort Gibson, east of there." "My daddy farmed beans and sorghum till the rains turned spiteful. Then he started drinking. Mama kept a garden, though." Her voice dropped. "Some things wouldn't grow no matter how she tried." Zach didn't ask what happened after that. He only waited, as he always did. The way he gave her space felt like steadiness instead of distance. "I used to think getting away meant going far," she said. Turns out it meant finding somewhere that didn't ask anything from me I hadn't already given. He studied her a moment, then nodded once. You've still got more to give, just needs to be yours to offer. She turned her head toward him. You always talk like a man who's seen too much but won't say it outright. He smiled, faint and tired. Maybe I just learned not everything needs telling. They spent the morning fixing the eastern fence line. A section had come loose where an antelope had scraped through. Savannah held the post steady while Zach hammered in new nails, the steady rhythm of wood and iron filling the quiet between them. You ever thought about leaving all this? She asked, leaning her weight into the post. I did once, he said, pausing to spit dust from his mouth. Went north for a winter, worked a sawmill near the San Juan. Couldn't breathe right with all those trees pressing in. Came back in the spring and built the porch. She glanced toward the cabin where the porch stood shaded and still. You built that after you came back. Needed something to sit on and think. Didn't much care for four walls without a way to see the horizon. After the fence was mended, they shared bread and cheese beneath a cottonwood near the creek. Savannah let her toes dip into the water while Zach leaned back against the trunk, one arm resting across his bent knee. I've been wondering, she said, breaking off a piece of crust. Why don't you keep animals anymore, besides the horse? He watched the current moving slow. Had a dog once. Smart, fierce. Someone poisoned him over a land dispute. After that, I kept mostly to myself. Savannah frowned. What kind of man poisons a dog just to win dirt? The kind who thinks land's worth more than decency. Her brow furrowed. Did you ever get even? Zach's jaw shifted slightly. Didn't have to. Man's own son turned on him over it. Took off, left his father to rot in that house with nothing but silence for company. She nodded slowly. Sounds like justice, in a way. He looked toward her, eyes steady. You believe in justice, Savannah. She tore off another bit of bread, thoughtful. I believe in consequence. The world doesn't always make things right, but it doesn't forget either. That evening, she helped him clean out the shed behind the cabin. Old feed sacks and rusted tools littered the corners. She found a wooden box beneath a tarp, inside it a leather-bound ledger, and several folded letters tied with twine. You want me to leave this be? She asked, holding it carefully. Zach looked up from where he'd been sweeping. No harm in reading what's already been lived. She untied the twine and opened the top letter. The handwriting was small, slanted, written in a woman's hand. Zacharias, she read aloud, I hope this finds you with clear skies and whole bones. I think of that day near the Picos when you fixed my wagon wheel with nothing but a broken knife and a length of fence wire. Zach held up a hand gently. That's from a girl I met once. Helped her through a hard patch. She had a way with words. Savannah placed the letter back. Did you love her? No, he said plainly. She was kind, but we didn't belong to each other. She closed the box. You ever feel like you do? Belong, I mean. He met her eyes. Maybe now. Savannah felt the weight of that settle in her chest, not heavy but sure. That night, after the lamps were out and the wind moved soft across the eaves, she stepped quietly from her bed and crossed the small room to where he lay. She stood over him a moment before he stirred, eyes opening slow. I'm not asking for anything, she whispered. I just don't want to sleep alone tonight. He shifted, made space beside him. She lay down, careful, her back to his chest. His hand found hers beneath the blanket, fingers twining without force. There was no heat in it, no demand, just warmth. Trust slowly earned. In the darkness, she whispered, I'm not property. His lips brushed the back of her shoulder, quiet as a benediction. No, you're not. And for the first time in years, she believed it. By midweek, the weather shifted. The wind came in from the south, carrying the smell of rain before the storm showed itself. Savannah stood beneath the porch eave, watching clouds roll over the western sky like slow cattle. She'd spent the morning mending a shirt of Zach's, the small tears at the cuff and collar speaking of long wear, not carelessness. Inside, Zach moved a drying rack near the fire, gently setting split mesquite logs into the hearth. The air inside the cabin held the faint scent of lye soap and the vinegar she'd used to scrub the floorboards earlier. "I was thinking," she said, her voice carrying through the open door, "about asking the widow at the mercantile if she needs someone to help keep her books. I've got a steady hand and I can add well enough." Zach finished arranging the logs, then straightened, brushing his hands on his trousers. "She's fair but sharp. She'll want proof you can keep a ledger honest. I kept my father's seed orders for 2 seasons," Savannah said, stepping inside and shaking the rain from her shawl, even when he couldn't remember what month he was in. Zach poured the last of the coffee into 2 tin mugs and handed her one. "Then you'll do fine." She took it, fingers brushing his, and leaned against the table. "You never said what you did before the cattle drives." He took a slow sip and looked toward the window. "Grew up working with wagons. My grandfather built wheels, taught me how to find the balance in them. I traveled with a freight company after he passed. Hauled flour rifles, once a church bell." Savannah raised a brow. "A bell, down near Tubac. The mission there had been waiting on one for 3 years. I nearly lost it in a flash flood crossing the Santa Cruz." She laughed softly, then looked down into her cup. "I never saw a church bell hung proper. Ours was a cracked iron pan nailed to a post." Zach smiled faintly. "Still calls a soul the same if it's listening." They stood together in the warm hush of the cabin while the rain began to fall outside, soft and steady. The roof held, though the wind drove the drops sideways against the windowpane. Later, after the storm passed, they walked the ridge behind the corral, the air clean and sharp with wet creosote. Savannah carried a basket lined with wax cloth, gathering wild onions and the last of the prickly pear fruit before the cold set in. Zach kept watch, rifle slung across his back, boots sinking into the softening trail. "You always carry that even out here?" she asked, crouching low to pull a cluster of berries from the thorn. "Found a cougar track last season, near where the sheep used to bed down." She straightened. "You don't keep sheep?" "Not anymore," he said. The path narrowed where the stone rose in uneven layers, and he offered her his hand without a word. She took it, letting him guide her across the rise. At the top they paused, looking out over the land as the light broke through in long golden strips. "I never knew land could be so quiet and still feel full," she whispered. "You get used to it," Zach said, voice hushed to match hers. "Then you start needing it." They sat beneath a juniper tree, the scent of crushed needles strong beneath them. Savannah peeled a pear fruit, careful of the spines, and handed him half. "I've been wondering," she said, breaking the silence, "if you ever thought about marrying." His eyes met hers steady. "Thought about it, didn't find the right reason." "What kind of reason would have counted?" "Someone who didn't want to be saved." "Just seen." She held his gaze, felt the quiet ache of recognition settle between them. "I don't want a man to carry my burdens," she said. "Just walk beside them." Zach nodded. "That's the only way I know to walk." They didn't speak after that, not for a long time. The wind picked up, lifting her hair from her shoulders, and he reached out to smooth it back, his palm warm at her temple. She leaned into the touch, not seeking it but accepting it. When they returned to the cabin, the sky was darkening again, and a chill had crept in behind the storm. Inside, she lit the oil lamp while he stirred the stew she'd started before they left. They sat close at the table, knees brushing beneath it, sharing the quiet meal with the kind of ease that needed no naming. Afterward, she stood beside the fire, folding the last of the linens. Zach came to stand near, the heat from the hearth warming both of them. "I won't leave come morning," she said, eyes on the flames. "Not yet." Zach reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "You have a place here, Savannah, if you want it." She turned to him. "I do." There was no rush to the way he leaned in, no urgency in the way she met him. Their kiss was slow, careful, and when it ended they stayed close, foreheads resting together. Outside, night deepened across the hills, but inside the fire held steady. So did they. The first frost came overnight. Savannah stepped outside at first light, her breath rising in faint clouds as she knelt to draw water from the barrel beneath the eaves. The surface had crusted thin with ice, delicate enough to crack with a touch, but it startled her all the same. The mornings had been cooler the last week, but this was the first true sign that winter was pressing in. She brought the bucket inside, setting it near the hearth where Zach was already tending the fire. He had risen early again, not from habit alone but because the chimney had been drawing slow, and he meant to climb up and check the flue before it grew colder. "There's a crack in the barrel lid," she said as she set the kettle atop the fire. "Letting in cold faster than it should." "I'll patch it before supper," Zach replied. "Got some pitch left in the shed." She nodded, then turned toward the peg where her shawl hung. "I'll head into town after breakfast. Mrs. Holcomb wants help sorting the ledgers before she goes to Tucson. Figure I can bring back flour and salt while I'm there." Zach glanced up from the fire. "You want me to ride with you? I can manage the bay on my own," she said, "but I wouldn't mind company if you've got no pressing chores." He stood, brushing soot from his sleeve. "I'll hitch the wagon. We'll haul back enough to last past New Year." They rode into Bisbee just after midday, the wagon wheels rattling over the hardened road. The town had grown quieter since the month-turned children bundled in shawls, smoke curling from chimneys, windows shuttered early to keep the heat. Savannah stepped down with ease now, her boots firm on the packed earth as she made her way toward the mercantile. Zach stayed behind to see the wagon loaded with coal and grain. Inside, the store was warm, the air thick with the scent of paraffin and dried oranges strung along the rafters. Mrs. Holcomb handed her a ledger and a stool, and they worked in companionable silence, the older woman occasionally humming a hymn under her breath. "You hold your numbers steady," Mrs. Holcomb said after a time, not looking up. "Steadier than most men I've hired." Savannah smiled faintly. "I was raised to keep quiet and notice what mattered." "Useful trait," the woman muttered. "You planning to stay out at Pike's place when the hard cold sets in?" Savannah didn't hesitate. "Yes." Mrs. Holcomb's eyes flicked up, sharp behind her spectacles. "He's a good man. Keeps to himself, but steady as they come." Savannah closed the ledger. "I know." She left the store with salt, flour, and a new spool of heavy thread tucked in her basket. Zach stood talking to the blacksmith, one hand resting on the wagon's edge. He looked over as she approached, his eyes finding hers like he'd known the moment she stepped through the door. They rode back slower, the wagon heavier and the sky dimming early with thick clouds. Halfway to the cabin, the first flakes began to fall slow, hesitant, as if testing the land before settling for good. "Ever spent a winter out here?" Zach asked, reins loose in his hands. She shook her head. "Only ever saw snow once before. I was small. It didn't last more than a day. It'll stay this time. Come January, the creek'll freeze at the edges." Savannah watched the flakes catch on his coat. "I don't mind." That evening, after the supplies were stored and the animals fed, she stood beside the fire combing out her hair. Zach sat at the table, oil lamp casting warm light across the page as he traced a letter he hadn't finished the winter before. "You ever think about building on?" she asked, setting down the comb. "There's space enough to add a room." He looked up, brow lifting slightly. "Was thinking of it." just hadn't had a reason. She moved to stand behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "You have won now." He covered her hand with his. "I'll draw up the plan after the thaw." Later, as they lay curled beneath the quilt, the wind howled low against the walls, but the cabin held. Savannah pressed her hand to Zach's chest, feeling the rise and fall beneath her palm. "I never thought I'd be warm like this," she said. He turned toward her, his breath stirring her hair. "You're more than warm. You're home." She leaned in, kissed him slow, and didn't pull away. His arms closed around her like they'd always meant to. They married 3 weeks later, under the cottonwood tree that had gone bare for winter. Mrs. Holcomb stood witness, as did the blacksmith and his wife. Savannah wore a dress of dark green wool she'd stitched herself, and Zach trimmed his beard for the first time in months. He spoke his vows low and certain, his voice steady as his grip on her hand. Afterward, they shared bread and dried fruit in the cabin with their few guests, the fire burning bright and the door open just enough to let in the scent of coming snow. That night, in the quiet that followed, Savannah stood at the window, one hand resting on the sill as she watched the flakes drift down. Zach came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You all right?" She leaned back against him. "I am." He kissed the curve of her neck. "You've changed the shape of this place." She turned in his arms. "It changed me first." "You did." They stood that way for a long time, the snow falling soft outside, the fire warm behind them, and the future unfolding like a field after rain, ready, waiting, and entirely their own. Years later, children's voices would echo through that cabin, their laughter wrapping around the beams Zach had laid with his own hands. Savannah would hang new curtains each spring, and he'd build a swing from the old cottonwood. They would grow old not quietly but contentedly, love weathered and worn like the land they called home. And though the world beyond the ridges shifted and changed, the cabin stood, and so did they, rooted, strong and unshakably together.